Well, hello and welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you for our book review session. And I have Brandin Roa here with me. Hi, Brandin.
Hi, Andrea. Hello, everyone.
So, book reviews quarterly, the Functional Nutrition Alliance nutrition team meets with our graduates, our FNLPs or functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioners, and has a book review that you lead, right, Brandon?
That's right.
And on the team, you are a functional nutrition counselor and our intake specialist. And I love that you've taken this role of taking on the book, leading the book club. You take such amazing notes. I feel like I get the cliff notes of every book. And I love that we get to come together here and do a bit of a review for others to see what our functional nutrition lens is on a particular book. And this past quarter, or this was it this month? Was it this month or last month? It was
January
last month.
31st. Yep,
Very close, on the edge.
very
So
good.
you guys chose a classic, The Art of Healing, Uncovering Your Inner Wisdom and Potential for Self-Healing by Dr. Bernie Siegel. And this was published in 2013. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Yeah, The Art of Healing. So Dr. Bernie Siegel has written many books. This particular book melds science and spirituality and how they interact under the lens of tapping into your body's potential to heal. So
Mm.
he draws on his clinical experience and then some of the work that he started to do with therapeutic tools, crayon drawings, with through a drawing seminar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that was the catalyst for stepping into the spiritual realm.
Such a particular time in medicine and healing where they were starting to bring together some of the mind, body, spirit approaches. And I think there was an awareness, and then maybe it kind of fell away or became part of a fabric we thought we knew, but it's always time to resurface that fabric.
Yeah, I think he may have been before his time in some ways. I think a lot of
It's
people
true.
thought that maybe he was a little bit woo-woo, and such an interesting place for someone to step in with as a conventionally trained practitioner, as a medical doctor, and in the realm of the medical model as we see it now. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really interesting. Um,
So what were your key takeaways from the book? Like yourself, and then we'll get into the group and the group discussion. But for you, were there like poignant moments that you were taking away?
well, the first thing that I took away was once I actually got into the book, I was like, I want to know this man. I want to spend some time with him. He's so interesting. His whole approach to the world and how he interacts with everyone was something that, or is something that I would love to see in action.
Mm,
I'm sure that some people might think that he's a little bit eccentric in his ways. And so I really appreciated how he meets the world. Other takeaways, I think that it really speaks to the emotional, mindful element of the healing journey and
mhm.
of the human experience, which I think is often. I think we're getting better at acknowledging that piece as part of the healing journey for sure. But also like just looking at the different ways that that can manifest it in a therapeutic environment, but also thinking about that there's so much that's untapped in terms of our potential and what we know about our bodies that we're not even conscious of.
Yeah,
So
it's fascinating. And again, like there was stuff happening around this time, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose work I love. Bruce
mhm,
Lipton, also amazing work about the biology of belief, like understanding that we hold these things within ourselves, within our body, and how we release and move on. It's really just a fascinating way to approach things. And as the group was discussing the book, you brought in the context of the mind, spirit, emotions community portion of the matrix. And for
Mhm.
anybody who doesn't know what the matrix is, you can always go to fxnutrition.com/matrix. I'll put a link to that in the area here at the bottom. But what were the connections that the group started to see between that portion of the matrix and the book?
I think, and just going back to what I just said, the mindset piece, the psychosocial part of the matrix, so the community emotions that came into play. I think one of the really brilliant discoveries that I didn't really tap into, I think the word empathy, came up over and over again, but thinking about how we might practice empathy, and whether some of these therapeutic practices could actually open the door for a more empathetic relationship with their clients.
So, why is that? I mean, I know we like to talk about functional
Mm.
empathy and the empathy matrix, and how do we get to that place? And it's, one of the things that I think practitioners are doing all wrong. So, how does the practices that Dr. Siegel spoke about bring us into therapeutic or functional empathy?
Yeah, I think what he does is he's empowering the patient in his case to use different avenues for self-expression. So whether that's drawing or laughter, visualizations, those are some of the things that he touched on. As a group in the discussion, we actually recognized that there were many more tools in that toolbox, but it's basically that whole empowerment piece that we talk about so much in functional nutrition. It's giving the client the ability to advocate. I think also we spend a lot of time talking about assessing and really understanding and seeing the whole person. And this may be an avenue for extending, our more traditional ways of capturing information. The drawing piece, drawing therapy, writing down what people are having people draw out, what their experiences can, and knowing how to interpret it is a different conversation, but there is some wisdom in those images that might shed some light on a piece of the person that we're seeing that we haven't yet tapped into. And he was really quick to note that some of the healing journey, or what needs to happen next from a therapeutic standpoint, resides within us. And so these
Yeah.
tools become an avenue for um, tapping into that wisdom that we're not conscious of.
Yeah, it makes me think, Brandon, of, he worked primarily, I believe, with cancer
Yeah.
patients, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that, but just that idea that when we are diagnosed with something like cancer, we can feel like we've become a pawn of the system. I know that was
Mhm.
a really pivotal moment for my husband, Isamu, when he was diagnosed, when they put the port in him for a CT scan, for the first CT scan. And he said, "Are you going to take that out?" And they said, "No, I think we'll leave it in." And it was that moment that was a really traumatic moment for him, because
Mhm.
he felt like he was their property now. They had instant access. And what this talks to me about is the idea that there is a place for patient expression, because we might not have that agency anymore that we feel like we have in our lives up until that moment. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering if you have any reflections about that, or how he spoke into that realm of empathy in relation to agency.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea that there is this potential that lives within us, and where are we being invited to express what we consciously or unconsciously know about our bodies and what our bodies will respond to. And I think for me, it was like, how do we help our clients kind of tap into and help them um, connect with their values, their stories, their experiences, that are giving us clues about where the healing potential could be that's not yet been discovered.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Let us know in the comments if you've read the book, or if you're curious about the book or the techniques that we're talking about. Brandon, did you feel like the book was dated? I mean, it's almost a decade since it came back. Did it feel dated?
It didn't for me. I went into the book thinking, this is not the most recently published book like we tend to read in the book club. And I think for me, it didn't feel old because I think the topic was something that is still very much an emerging um, topic for practitioners, for patients, for clients, for kind of like the collective awareness of what a healing journey could look like that
Yeah.
we don't already, kind of stepping outside of the mainstream.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like some people haven't read it yet, but
Yeah,
curious now. So that'll be
yeah,
fun to give you we'll give you a thumbs up or thumbs down by the end.
yeah.
Dr. Siegel uses a couple of terms that I'm wondering if you could speak into. And one of them is
Okay.
carefrontation. And these are the things that may feel a little bit dated, right? Some of these terminologies may feel that's where we might think about things a little bit differently in the last decade. But what does that mean, carefrontation?
Well, I agree, it might feel a little dated. He defines confrontation as a safe, loving, therapeutic confrontation, which facilitates personal lifestyle changes, personal empowerment, and healing of the individual's life.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. Those are good things. I think it's just the way that we might be approaching the therapeutic partnership that the
Exactly.
term itself that has confrontation in its, it is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like, referenced there,
Mhm.
that may be a little alarming from our vantage point now, but the intention of carefrontation, is that one you feel like you can uphold or agree with in your practice as a functional
Well,
nutrition counselor?
I think that the term confrontation provided with the context is a
Yes.
really great idea. Um, I think too, probably at his point in 2013, he was, stepping into a world that was like, this might be too woo woo for me.
Right.
And so the confrontation part may be bringing out, this is big, this is new, it's a shift in the way of thinking. Um, and I think it might be like a little more received more softly now, given where we're at, and certainly the experiences that we're having in healthcare that we're actually able to talk openly about. Because I think 10 years ago, even certainly going further back in time, our experiences in talking about our medical history, and our experiences in the doctor's office and whatnot, those are all things that weren't readily discussed.
Right. So true. It's just changed so much. Let us know in the comments if you're able, what you think of that term, carefrontation. I mean, it does actually shift the confrontation to a softer arena. So, for when it was coming about, it makes a lot of sense to bring the confrontational relationship to more of a carefrontational realm.
Yeah.
So, the other terminology that I saw was discussed was something called exceptional behavior. And that's the one that kind of struck me as like, ooh, that could be a little prickly. But I want to hear more context about that term, exceptional behavior.
Yeah, this idea that we all have this these the potential to influence our healing journeys, that we can be this, um, I can think of the right word, this embodiment of
Yeah,
having all of this empowered energy and permission. Um, he was really wanting he used the idea of exceptional behavior as a way to capture that whole realm of allowing everybody to be aware of and to work with their healing potential. In our discussion as a group, there were some really interesting points around that because, like you, I was curious what exceptional behavior looks like because I think it is quite relative and it's something that when we think about behavior, it can be very subjective. So
totally.
we talked about that, yeah, in the group, and some of the things that came out was, who it is that we're working with. So, and exceptional behavior may be demonstrated by somebody who in the FxNA clinic, we talk about being big bigs, the archetypes. So have big health issues. They've done a lot of work to support themselves. So exceptional behavior might look like, them continuing to be open to receiving help, and that being in that healing trajectory, because for some people it can be really demotivating. So
yeah,
exceptional behavior is stepping into doing that even deeper dive than they've already done. This idea, helping how people can learn to step into their potential, using exceptional behavior, and that idea that people have more in them to move forward. How to harness that is a different conversation. But I think really what he's doing is letting us know that there's so much more to be tapping into that we're not even aware of.
yeah, yeah, and going inside instead of some external
Mm-hmm.
idea or ideal of who we're supposed to be. And I think that's the place that, with that terminology, and again, different time, nearly a decade ago, but that idea of exceptional behavior was one that, when I brought it up to you, made you snicker a little bit, because it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like you went through the same trajectory of like, wait, what does that mean? And
Mm-hmm.
again, we bring it back to the therapeutic partnership and the inner empowerment, as opposed to some ideal of following all the steps or the rules or doing it
Yeah.
just right and exceptionally based on my standards of
Yes.
exceptional. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think the one way that we facilitate that in our clinical partnerships is creating a safe and judgment-free zone to have
right.
to have the work happen, to have the conversations happen. Um, so it may not be so much an archetype in my mind, but more of it is the embodiment of what is possible.
Right. And it brings us back to that functional empathy. I'm putting the term
Mhm.
functional in front of what was discussed as empathy. So in
Yeah.
the book, Brandin, he has a doctor's RX, a recommendation or kind of a
Mhm.
how-to step at the end of every chapter. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those RXs, those recommendations were, and how you felt about those?
Yeah. So each chapter delved into some element of the therapeutic toolbox. So drawings, dreams, visualizations, laughter therapy, and he would provide examples. He would provide the science behind how these work, and then he would offer an exercise for how we could work with the concept in our daily life. So not many of the readers actually delved into some of those things, but they did really, some of them really gravitated towards certain tools. There, for one, dreams, we had somebody on the team that has already done a lot of work in dream work. She'd actually done a course, so that naturally spoke to her. I think the whole idea of using drawings and, for somebody to put on paper, given a cue and to draw, that sounds really neat, but how do you interpret it? So that felt
Right.
maybe a little bit less accessible. But he, in his book, had a whole bunch of drawings. These are all in black and white. I don't know if you can see those or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he went through, and for every figure, he described what was going on in there for the individual that drew it. So that was really interesting for a lot of people. Some were going to investigate it further. And then we talked about visualization. There's a lot of that, but we talked about the personalization aspect of visualization and what we could do as practitioners. So if we're working on something really specific, what could we do? We could prepare videos or audios that facilitate that visualization that can be takeaways for our clients, rather than, there's lots of really great resources out there, but that was something that might be a next step. And then another individual on our team is trained in laughter yoga, which is something that I've used in the past with my clients, and it's like an amazing tool, and it's so accessible. So those were some of the tools from the doctor's RX, the toolkit. that we might be delving into as potential supports.
Yeah, there's, it reminds me again, especially because we're talking about this in relation to cancer care, not just my history as a clinician, but of course, what led me to be a clinician at that time with my late husband, Isamu, and he did guided imagery therapy so that when he was receiving radiation to his brain, he was, instead of rejecting it, trying to lovingly accept this thing that he knew was toxic for his body.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the thousands of people that we've worked with in the clinic, that oftentimes people have to take a medication or something like an antibiotic that they know is not good for them fully, but it has a
Mm-hmm.
purpose. And so
Yeah.
that's, I think, a place where visualization can be really, really potent and powerful to shift the story we're telling ourselves, to reject the thing that actually is serving a purpose. It's what in functional nutrition we call the yes and. Like, yes, that antibiotic or whatever we're going to put in that blank slate there may be doing some harm, but I'm taking it for a reason. And how do I accept that into my body with all that it's meant to do? So that's a place I think visualization and acceptance can be really potent and powerful.
Yeah, I like that acceptance piece. I think whatever we do, we believe that it's going to derive some benefit for us. We don't go through the motions because somebody suggested that it might serve us well.
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Mm-hmm.
that's a tough one. Either way, somebody told us it might serve us well, or we think it's negative, and
Mm-hmm.
so we don't want to go there. I mean, I know how long it took me to take thyroid support because I wanted to do it on my own, right? But once I was like, wow, I'm making my body work really hard. How do I accept the support for myself as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
rejecting it as something I haven't done just right? So I need
Mm-hmm.
this support, right? It's that shift, I think, in acceptance that this brings us beautifully into.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Did anything change for you and your practice, either personally, Brandin, or professionally, that kind of shifted the way you handle intake sessions, or that you would recommend the team do differently in our nutrition counseling
Yeah.
sessions?
I would say that anything shifted in terms of embracing any kind of new therapeutic tools. I think it was confirmation that that's a really important part of our healing toolbox that we need to be thinking about and embracing. It got me thinking about some of the parasympathetic um, responses that people have, and so yeah, and so how do we get out what we have in a way that might serve people better? And um, so I'm paying attention in the intake sessions just to what people are doing, and sometimes like picking up new hobbies or changing hobbies or picking up a meditation practice, you can see the shift for people in maybe not um, improvements in their health fully, but just some progression incremental. And so I think it's affirmed in what we see clinically, and I think it's up to the practitioner ultimately how you might embrace some of these other things. I think one of the challenges that we all recognized is we do so much already. We're very
Yeah.
thorough. We capture a lot of information. Where does it fit in? So
Yeah.
there's definitely an opportunity for it, but where would it fit in? And we talked about maybe it's something that comes a little bit later on in nutrition counseling versus, something you're trying to incorporate right out of the get-go.
Yeah,
On
that's really
case-by-case basis.
interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about you know, this in my own personal work and my own personal writing. Like, how do we release some of these things as patients coming to the table? Because we're, of course, talking through two lenses. We are all
Mm,
patients. So we come to the table as like, who am I and what am I implementing? And then, of course, at the Functional Nutrition Alliance, we're focused on the excellent practices of functional nutrition counselors.
mm,
And so that brings me to a question. Well, I'm going to put that question aside and first ask you, book, thumbs up, thumbs down? Like, would you recommend, final point really that we want to get to, would you recommend the book?
Most definitely. Most definitely. I would recommend it to all practitioners. We collectively as a group thought it may not be for everyone in the patient realm or the client realm. But yes, absolutely. It's if only to see how interesting this gentleman is. I think his body of work is really important, but it's also a big point of curiosity for me. And as a result of that, I will spend some time. I did listen to some podcasts with him as we preparing for book club, and yeah, I just love to sit down and have a tea with him. I think he how he meets the world would be just so interesting to witness.
Yeah, and I love what Randy put here. I'm gonna put her comment or their comment in. That's what we were saying. This was a huge time of change. It was really, really different. And some of these practitioners were really changing how we work with people now. And I also feel like it's become part of the fabric and it's become lost again. Like
Mm-hmm.
we keep like touching into it and then leaving it and then touching back into it. And it's kind of like we know it, but are we actually practicing it like we did when Bernie Siegel, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Louise Hay, Joan Borisenko, when they were bringing these practices to the front? And so, yeah, it's just really interesting to think about how we're working with them. So
Mm-hmm.
thumbs up, and you did talk a little bit into like thumbs up for all practitioners. Like, let's go
Mm-hmm.
back to some of those roots
Mm-hmm.
of how and what's involved in patient care and patient healing, even if we're not the ones to make space for
Yes.
it, right? Like, how do we make sure that people are tapping into that? And then based on the patient, maybe an iffy in terms of where they are in their healing
Yes.
journey. And again, like if somebody has cancer, they're on a expedited healing
Mm-hmm.
journey because they're going through stuff. So tell me a little bit more in closing about that conversation about who we would or wouldn't recommend it to.
Yeah, I think the collective feelings were definitely a practitioner read, if only for a reference book. Um, Dr. Siegel has written many other books that may be more layperson friendly. Um,
Accessible, maybe.
accessible is a great word, yeah. So small daily snippets of inspiration or insights in some of his other books. Love, Medicine, Miracles was one that was suggested. It could be a book for some clients, and you'd have to evaluate that person by person. Um, Not everyone. I think when you were saying we kind of move in and we move out of this wisdom and these practices, and in questioning why, a lot of people might think it's a little too woo woo, and so we don't want to scare people away, but we also want to help plant seeds for allowing them to connect with that part of their healing potential. So, and some people felt that the book may offer some hope for those that may feel a little bit discouraged by what hasn't happened yet in their healing journey.
Yep.
So I think just a really mixed bag, and it's really important to, I think, as we say, it depends. It depends on
It
the
depends.
person. Yeah, and we really have to honor that when we think about recommending this book.
Yeah, yeah, I love some of the comments I'm seeing. So good to see you all here. And Brandon, any final thing we just didn't touch on that you were burning to share with us about the book?
I'd like to share a quote if that would be okay. I
Yeah,
picked out a quote
good.
early in the book that kind of I've still been sitting with. So it's just a couple of lines here. I'll read it out. So, our daily and hourly life experiences, sensations, thoughts, images, emotions, and behavior can modulate gene expression and neurogenesis in ways that actually can change the physical structure and functioning of your brain. Your mind is like a remote control with an infinite number of channels to choose from. And talking about your greater consciousness. And your body is like the TV screen that plays whichever channel you tune into. The quote is from Ernest Rossi. And I really love that because it reminds us that mindset is such a big part of how we manifest health in that gene expression. And I think the analogy about the TV and the channel changer is really, really easy for a lot of people to grab onto. So I like that, and I'm going to hang on to that quote. And I think it encapsulates so well what Bernie tried to achieve in this book.
Yeah, yeah, really beautiful. It just makes me think about the timeline, which is your area of expertise. So, thank you so much, Brandin, for leading the book club, for reviewing the book, and spending this time cliff noting with me and for all of us.
Thank you for the invitation to come back and talk about it again. It's been
Yeah,
my pleasure.
good to see you all. Thanks for being with us. Happy
Bye-bye.
reading.
Yes, happy reading.